Welcome to today's webinar on shifting to T+1 settlement across the UK and the EU. My name is Martin, and I will be the moderator for today's session, which we're hosting in partnership with Clearstream and Euroclear. During this webinar, we're going to discuss a number of things around T+1, and we're going to be using some of the statistics that came out in our survey, where we surveyed around 350 people in Q3 last year. Some of the key areas we're going to look to discuss will be dependencies. Dependencies came out as a key challenge for firms. Both upstream and downstream dependencies. We're also going to have a little look at risk, settlement efficiency, and other risks that may be increasing as a result to move to T+1, and some of the ways that firms can look to mitigate against those risks. And we're also going to have a look at kind of data and technology strategies that can enable firms not just to come out of T+1 in an okay manner, but to come out in a stronger manner than they were before. To do this today, I'm thrilled to be joined by a really great panel of speakers. We have Gareth Jones from Euroclear, Kathy Waldie from Clearstream, and ValueExchange's very own Emma Johnson, our resident T1 guru. Maybe if I could get you all to just do a quick introduction into who you are, and I'm just going to go with the order you are on my screen. So Kathy, maybe you go first.
Thank you, and thank you, Martin, and good afternoon, everyone. So I am the head of Target Services Governance at Clearstream, and I'm also the lead on the T+1 program.
Thank you, Kathy. And Gareth?
Yes, thank you, Martin. Also, thank you for inviting me on today. So Gareth Jones, I head up settlement and banking on the kind of product management side at Euroclear, and I'm looking after T+1 across the Euroclear group.
Thank you, Gareth. And Emma?
Yeah, Emma Johnson. So I head industry advocacy and insight at ValueExchange. And I think it's also important to say that, you know, all three of us are EU Industry Committee workstream co-leads on various different work streams. So you've got, you know, some brains here in Kathy and Gareth.
You set yourself up there, Emma. I'm going to have to challenge you and ask you lots of very difficult questions. And before I get into my questions, I just wanted to do a quick poll question if I can. So if you're Sunny, if you could just bring up the first poll. I just want to get a view for where we all are today with our own preparation for move to T+1. Obviously, we have some data on this from the surveys that we've had, but it'd be good to get your view on whether or not you're still in the planning phase, whether or not you're in a design phase. Have you started building? Have you even gone further ahead than that and started testing? Or are you ready and set and ready to go all guns blazing for T+1? If you are, then that's great. But let's see what the response is, Yusani. Okay, so we have about 50% of viewers still in the planning phase. Kathy, maybe if I just start with you, just to get your view on what that looks like. Do you think we're roughly where we should be at this point?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, looking back at the survey, I saw that 100% of the CSDs responded, or who responded, said they'd read the roadmap. So from a CSD perspective, I think that's let's say it's a good start. I would hope everybody's now a bit further on than that, well into execution, be that the design or building phase. But I think the most important thing that I take away from the survey is it's a really good baseline against which we can continue to measure how the industry is progressing.
Thanks, Kathy. And Gareth, any views on what you see on screen here, or any thoughts on how we get people moving along away from the planning phase and into maybe some of the later phases?
Yeah, I think what I take away from the survey is that kind of the heart of the market, the kind of the infrastructure, the custodians, the dealers are all kind of moving forward with their projects. Some of the kind of core geographies are quite well advanced. which is great, exactly where you'd need to be. And you can see that some of the kind of the out of region geographies, it's new, people are less advanced, and I think that's again probably where you'd expect to be now. And I think it's going to be for the next 12 months, probably every quarter. The next quarter is really important, because I think we're absolutely in a good place, but we need to make progress now with some of the areas which are less engaged in this next quarter, and we will continually see that, I think, over the next 12 months. It'll be fine, but then it's only be fine if the next quarter the right things happen.
Thanks, Gareth. And then Emma, just lastly with you, I know Gareth and Kathy have probably covered most of it there, but some of the deadlines we do have are coming up, not in October 2027, but at the end of this year. So just your view on where we are now and how we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. T+1 is not just 11th of October 2027. There's a whole host of recommendations that actually come in at the end of this year. So that planning number, 52%, that really needs to come down when we conduct future surveys. And I'd like to have seen more in the building phase, to be honest. I was expecting that to be slightly higher. So I think there's lots of work to do.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about dependencies for a little bit. And Kathy, the first question is going to be for you. Around 2/3 of firms that responded to the survey said that they had concerns around dependencies of CSDs and ICSDs, which is actually the highest ranked of all of the dependency categories. From your perspective, which dependencies are kind of genuinely kind of gating progress today, and which ones perhaps are maybe being overstated by the market?
Okay. So as of today, I doubt that there are many really genuine dependencies stopping firms from getting on with it. So for every firm, that journey to T+1 is going to be very individual. So everybody has got to do their own impact assessment. They've got to secure the budget. They've got to get the plan in place, and they've got to execute. And I see overall, there's that figure of dependency 58%, dependency on other parties, and having clarity on requirements, what came out as 41%. And to me, those are probably two sides of the same coin in many ways. So there were a few topics from the roadmap where we needed to bottom them out. And the industry committee has now published then the outcome of the 3 task forces. So we had SSIs, we had T0 securities financing transaction, and partial settlement last month. So, and there the industry has agreed on solutions and on market practice. And also the industry committee's now published the handbook in early Feb. And that's got loads of details and guidelines for practitioners. So a lot of this is not rocket science, but we're talking about a lot of good practices that have been around for years. So automation, good data quality, and making smart use of tools. So of course, there are going to be questions and clarifications that are needed over the next 18 months, which is normal for an industry transmission. But I think it's really important that now we make sure that no one is hiding behind dependencies and is as an excuse for dragging their feet.
It's a really interesting take on it. And Gareth, I guess similar question to you, really. Where do you see kind of any dependencies inhibiting progress? And maybe also talk a little bit about kind of what Euroclear has been doing and is planning to do to alleviate any of those concerns around dependencies.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, listen, Kathy gave a very good answer. I would just add a little bit. I see the way I view the a project like this, the way change kind of moves from the kind of the center, from the industry committee at the heart of the market, to what happens. It's a bit like a stone. You throw a stone into water, and the kind of requirements and the change ripples out from the center. So the industry committee recommendations last June, they were the first point with the extra pieces published in December, and then they go out to the FMIs, and then the customers of the FMIs, they need the FMIs to be saying what they're going to be doing, and that's really important. secure budgets, and Kathy's absolutely right, people should be securing budgets now. They should be doing impact assessments now on what they think is going to happen. But until the FMIs have published their own proposals, then you do have a little bit of a wait until people aren't quite sure what the exact changes are going to be. And we see this in Euroclear Bank, for example, because we've got our own recommendations. Sorry, we've got our own changes we're making, but we're also a participant in all markets in Europe. So we're also waiting to see whatever market infrastructures are doing. So that's, I think we're in that stage now. On the Euroclear side, we published the changes of the industry committee published in June last year. We published our own detailed implementation plans for those in January, and the extra items where the industry committee published in December, we will be publishing our own detailed specifications about those changes. We're publishing those at the end of March. So you can see that kind of, so we are trying in all our markets to be very good at quickly getting our own changes in, because that helps our clients lock down what they need to do. So it's a ripples going out, and I think we're in the FMI stage at the moment. The FMIs are publishing, and the sooner the FMIs are able to do that, the better for the rest of the market as it ripples out.
Thanks, Gareth. I think it's a really nice analogy for it. One of the other things I think maybe holding people up, and Emma, this question is for you, Emma, if that's okay, but I think, there's a lot of recommendations out there. There's a lot of regulation out there, both coming from, the EU side as well as the UK side. Can you maybe just talk to us a little bit about what is mandatory, what is best practice, and how that differs across potentially the approaches by the UK and the EU?
Yeah, sure. And I think it's really important just to clarify that there is regulation at play here. So thanks for bringing that up, Martin. And I think as a headline, the UK and the EU they're moving together under CSDR, which may sound strange, but UK did retain CSDR. So the settlement cycle will change 11th of October in tandem, UK and EU CSDR. But really, that's where the regulation side of things kind of ends for the UK. The rest of it is through the accelerated settlement task forces, T+1 code of conduct, which is industry-led recommendations. But we should make no mistake here. The FCA, Bank of England, HMT, they are behind this initiative. They will be looking to the industry to implement per the AST's TCC. So there is nowhere to hide. I think from an EU point of view, it is slightly different because obviously CSDR level 1, but there is the delegated regulation under CSDR, the settlement discipline regime. So really, when we think about the high-level roadmap recommendations, Giovanni Sabatini's recommendations, and he always says, adhere or explain. But that adhere or explain will become adhere and comply for, many of the recommendations. And we're talking some real headline ones here, actually. I would just touch on a couple if I can. Allocation confirmation. So much of, it's such an important aspect that, you have to start right at the top. So the allocation kind of triggers a whole load of downstream actions. So for allocation to require a PSET to place a settlement, for the allocation and confirmation to be conducted by end of business on trade date, this is all now regulation as of the 7th of December 2026. So that is super important because quite often, T+1 is fault of allocation and confirmation. Absolutely, it's regulation. And then settlement instructions as well. So a settlement instruction becomes, and there's a bit of misconception here, it is written in the level 2 that the instructions should reach the CSD by 2359. It is in the level 2. We expect it to be in level 2 when it is adopted by the European Commission, but that will not prevent settlement instructions from not being received by the CSD. So I think that's busting a myth there. I think that's really important. But absolutely, ESMA will be looking for the industry to implement there. There's some others, partial settlements, the opt-in, it's opting into partial settlement and you have to opt out. There's been a lot of work done by the EU Industry Committee here on partial settlement. And I think Jesus Sanchez from SIX deserves an absolute medal here. And there are some other recommendations that the CSDs do bear the brunt of many, so I'm sure they'll implement it in quick order. But disclosure, batch times, and so on. So there's, I do recommend everyone does read that level 2 if they haven't done already. It was published in October last year.
Thank you, Emma. In depth as always. One of the other challenges that came through in the survey was differences or inconsistencies between markets, partly within the EU itself. But Gareth, from your perspective with Euroclear, obviously having a foot in the UK and in Europe, maybe if you could just talk to us a little bit about some of the divergence there, where approaches are, truly different, or potentially where it's just, different terminology, or if it is different in settlement system mechanics.
Okay, I think let's start with one which Emma just talked about, the target time to get your settlement instructions into the settlement system, where I think there's been some people kind of slightly puzzled as to why is it 05:59 in the UK and why is it 23:59 in Europe, in the European Union, and let me try and explain that one, because I think that is seen as actually a big difference, when actually I think it's practically the same. And for people, for T1 aficionados, there was a very similar divergence there, by the way, between the US and Canada for exactly the same reasons. I think Canada, you had to get your settlement instructions in by about 4 o'clock in the morning, whereas the US, it was the night before. And what's driving the difference there actually is the operational day timetable for each for the settlement, for the different markets. So in the UK, the CREST platform starts settlement in the morning at 6 o'clock in the morning. It's actually, I think it's down. You can't settle between, I think it's something like 4 o'clock in the afternoon approximately, and 6 o'clock the following morning. And indeed, some parts of the day you can't even input or reconcile. But at 5:59, it's 1 minute before settlement starts. So it's saying you need to get your settlement instruction in by the time settlement starts. In the UK, that's 5:59. In the European Union, the operational day workstream, which I co-led, that landed up with T2S, which is the kind of the core of settlement in the EU. That now the key event for the start of settlement in the EU is actually going to be midnight, and I won't go too much into details, but there's a particular point as T2S starts its process each day where normal settlement starts to happen. It's not about corporate actions or liquidity transfers. It's normal settlement of market transactions. And there's actually an event which allows the CCPs, the central counterparties, to get the priority of settlement. And that's really important because everybody wants them to get the priority because they're the heart of the market, and that is seen to promote settlement efficiency overall. And that event will run at midnight, that particular event for the CCPs as T2S starts. So therefore, again, the 23:59 in EU is 1 minute before that event. So although EU and the UK look quite different in that, actually it's exactly the same. It's saying get your settlement instructions in by the time the key start of settlement activity happens. But then, as Emma says, actually, if you put your settlement instructions in later, they will still settle. It's just, the industry wants everybody to get them in so that liquidity is good at the start of the day. So that's an area where EU and UK maybe look different, but actually very similar. Couple of others I think worth mentioning. A lot of discussion, I think, about SSIs, where the way they're described in the various task force papers and allocations confirmations look a little bit differently, but actually, and I'm not a super expert in the detail of these areas, but kind of my kind of understanding is actually they're all broadly saying exactly the same thing, and it's about electronic SSIs. It's about having standards for exchanging them. It's having certain fields applied to them, and they've just been specified in different ways, but it's really the same thing. So I think that's actually not one to worry about too much. And it's also worth mentioning FX and testing, actually the two work streams across the EU and UK now come together. They've kind of done like a reverse Brexit and kind of just merged, which is good to see. The big difference actually is I think in the fixed income markets, where the UK, the gilt market is already T+1, the EU is not. It's a T+2 market at the moment. So there's a big change there in the government bond markets. And I'm sure we'll come on to talk about it in a little bit, but the EU is recommending a particular adaptation called the kind of securities financing kind of gating event, which is to deal with some of the liquidity challenges which will arise as a result of an increased amount of T+0 repos, and that is quite unique to the EU, and that is because it's only gilt market in the UK is not impacted by the move at all.
You, Gareth. That's a really great summary, and I think good to hear that what you talk about. Although there are some, there are a couple of very key differences. For the most part, there's a lot of similarities, a lot more similarities than there are differences, and adapting and onboarding kind of best practice is going to serve you well across both markets, as well as any other market that's looking to move to T+1, or even the US market, which already has. Emma, I just wanted to talk in a little bit more detail around allocations and confirmation. So, you obviously mentioned earlier that this is going to be one of the things that goes into regulation in the EU at the end of this year. Whenever we've done a survey on when firms are planning to start doing allocations and confirmations on T0, almost half the firms actually say they're not going to be doing that by the end of this year. They're going to be doing it either in 2027, in some cases even later. So I guess there's a couple of questions here. One is, why do you think that is? And two is, what does that mean for a broader kind of fails and operational risk under T1?
Thanks. That's a really good question. In terms of why, I mean, I honestly don't know. I don't know why the survey results are consistently so high for allocation and confirmation. When I kind of look back to some of the work the UK AST done, I think probably like maybe last year or the year before, we actually analysed the DTCC's CTO match agreed stats, and they're in the high 90s. But I think what we're probably seeing here is a bit of like smoke and mirrors. I think the DTCC stats will run, their operational day runs until close of business US time. So firms probably don't know whether they're able to allocate and confirm to meet the UK and EU's respective deadlines for allocation and confirmation. So I would like to think that if we could unpick that and create, some, I'm all about checklists right now, but to have a good checklist that actually, show firms, where they're hitting. So I think, call to arms really for the DTCCs, fix other platform providers to be able to really say to them, to their participants, you're at 50%, you must do better. You're at 98%, well done you. I think we need to kind of give the industry more transparency there. And I think really when we think about back to the point we made about the 2300 CET for EU, 2359 for the UK, we need to also think about time zone and why those deadlines are there to protect us, so that we can meet the respective settlement system starter settlement deadlines that Gareth just spoke of. And that's no different to how the US and Canada approached it. So I think that's really, really important to kind of bear in mind. And in thinking about that, 2300 CET is 5 p.m. Eastern time. 2359 is 1859 Eastern time. So when we think about the next day settlement date, time zone is against the US. They have to work hard on trade day to get their instructions in, allocate, confirm, instruct. Otherwise, there's nowhere to go when settlement closes at 10 a.m. Eastern time on ISD. APAC have the flip side. They haven't got a trade date essentially in terms of that deadline, if the deadlines that we spoke of, that's in the early hours for them, but they will have their working day to get their instructions amended should they need to be, like linked back to the CSD and the custodians reporting to see whether they need to make any amendments. So it's about making use of best time. And I think that would be the biggest advice I could give is to, challenge operational processes within these confines, but make sure that they can work for you and you can still meet the requirements of each market in the same way the industry had to for the US and Canada. The trade-off is, and we don't want this, increased settlement fails, increased risk that goes against the whole grain and the whole rationale of why we're moving to T+1. Nobody wants that, I'm sure.
Yep.
Let me just, sorry, Martin, can I just compliment
Please
there
do.
on what Emma's said, indeed, because I think it's really important then to look at the consequence of it. We absolutely understand the pressure and the time compression, and the fact that the time compression is a big challenge in any case. And then regardless of whether you're talking about east or west, you've got those trade-offs in terms of, does it give you more time in some regards and less time in other regards? More time at a different point during the day, let's say in the US and than in the Far East. But the downstream effect of it can be very significant. And let's face it, the reason why, from an industry committee perspective, we came up with the recommendation of 2359 to have the instructions in place, is that we believe very strongly, and this is backed up as well by the empirical evidence, that having the instructions in place at the time when the settlement platform actually starts operating creates the best preconditions for the highest settlement efficiency rates. So, this is not, it's not something that's happening in a vacuum. It will have real world consequences, not perhaps on an individual instruction basis, but the fact is that having those allocations and confirmations processed on a timely basis with a high degree of accuracy will create those preconditions then for a higher settlement efficiency. So there's multiple dependencies there, and therefore it's in everybody's interests to make sure that they're tackling that as part of their preparation.
Thanks for adding that in, Kathy. And it's also good that you guys are also talking about the difference of impacts depending on the region that we're sat in, because we do know, and we had live example of that when we saw the North American move, that certain regions were impacted in different ways, had different challenges. Before we actually move on to, I guess, a bit of an extension of what you were just talking about there, Kathy, around kind of risk, I just wanted to remind everyone that there is a Q&A option. If you have any questions, please do pop them in the bottom. I'm sure we'd all rather be talking about what you want to know rather than what I want to know. So feel free to ask any questions you have there. On the subject of managing risk, and Kathy, why don't we just stay with you, as you were already in such a good flow. So obviously after years of investment to improve settlement efficiency in Europe, according to the survey, it's now kind of the biggest impact area for T1. I think a substantial amount of firms said they expect settlement efficiency to be negatively impacted. When you do compress the settlement cycle, kind of what risks do you think become more visible than they were previously under T+2? And that can be across anything from funding, FX, inventory forecasting. What do you think is the biggest risks?
Yeah. Okay, I mean, thanks, Martin. There's a few survey responses that kind of raise, well, not quite a red flag with me, but they certainly, it's dark orange, and that is one, and Emma knows this very well because we worked on it together as co-leads of the settlement workstream. But that's about the importance of using prediction tools and smart inventory and funding management. And that is something which we see as being key to supporting, good settlement efficiency. And that is about making sure that you're aware of the settlements that are coming up for settlement tomorrow, that you've got the inventory in the right place, or if you're split across depots, then you're making sure you've got the realignments in place, you've got the funding in place. That also requires, ideally, the counterparties having their instructions in place, because you can better work and better predict based on matched instructions than you can on unmatched instructions. But what we see in the survey is that there are about 28% of institutions already have those sort of tools in place. And that matches up broadly with some of the stuff that we saw, some of the results that we saw during the work of the work stream last year. But what's of concern really to me is that we've got 26% of institutions are saying they are not planning to implement that recommendation on forecasting tools. And I would say, why on earth not? Is that because it's too big? What are the reasons for that? Because it is one of the key tools to implement to help your treasury, to help your middle office, to help your operations, to work together efficiently and reduce your settlement fails and your settlement penalties. There's another big chunk, 47%, saying they don't know yet. Now, that may be understandable. A lot of people are still in the planning phase, but we really need to keep a very close eye on this, because to me, this is one of the key levers that the industry should be paying attention to as a way for, you know, efficient settlement management. The other one that I would mention, and I'll probably come back to later on, but is about ETFs, because everything that we say about compressed timeframes, you can basically multiply that for ETFs. Why? Because they have particularly complex flows with multiple dependencies, depending on whether you're in the secondary or the primary space. And many of those do not work today on a T+2 cycle. So we can anticipate there. We'll have to be paying a lot of attention to those. And whatever we're doing for the normal flow, we definitely need to be doing it just as much for ETF, and probably looking at some specials to add in there as well.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. Gareth, over to you. Anything you wanted to add around like risks that can that will start to become more visible once we move to an accelerated settlement?
Yeah. So I think what's driven both the UK Accelerated Settlement Task Force and the EU Industry Committee, all the conversations I've been part of there, has always been, how can we ensure there's no deterioration in settlement efficiency? And I think that is the kind of the risk as an industry we face if there is a deterioration in settlement efficiency. I think Kathy was alluding to some of those points. The one I want to particularly focus on is actually getting in settlement instructions into CSDs on a timely basis and getting them right first time. And the reason I mention that is because I think we see in all of the Euroclear CSDs, whether it's the ICSD or the domestic CSDs, we see that, you know, under the CSDR penalty regime, we see kind of 20 to 25% of fails are caused by failure to get settlement instructions matched in CSDs on settlement date. But actually, it's probably, those are directly caused by failure to get them matched. It's probably another 20 to 25% of fails which look as if people haven't got securities are actually the knock-on effect of that failure to match, meaning another transaction fails. So, you know, a lot, let's say, you know, close to 50% of settlement fails caused by people not getting them right first time into the CSDs. And if you think about it, that's where you lose so much of the time. That's where the famous AFME 85% of the time is lost, is actually going to be particularly impacting, you know, getting your settlement instructions in and matched correctly. So getting it right first time really matters, which is why the allocation and confirmation times matter. That's why the SSIs matter. But then also you won't always get it right first time. And so therefore the ability to follow up really quickly, to deal with exceptions on a intraday basis on trade date, not sorting out the kind of the things that have gone wrong on T+1 before settlement of T+2. It's about dealing with exception management on trade date with good tooling to do that, with good kind of using using good workflows with your counterparties and so on. That's where having good data available to do that and good benchmarking of what's going on to allow you to manage it. So we see that as being a really important part of how the industry needs to react to T+1, and that's why we've got our kind of Easy Focus Plus product launched, which is exactly to try to help people deal with those inefficiencies and solve problems quickly.
Just wanted to move on a bit to I guess the difference between treating T+1 as a compliance event and treating it as a catalyst for structural automation. Emma, if you don't mind, from kind of your view, what are the benefits of a firm looking at this not as a compliance ticking exercise, but just as a way to improve the way they do business on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think it's so easy to think about just meeting the minimum requirements to get over the line, but in initiatives like this, and I think we've seen in previous implementations that automation has come after the event rather than before. And I think we're in a competitive environment where there's, from a custodian point of view, there's many custodians, there's many brokers, intermediaries. It's a tight business. You're meant to be. One of the benefits is delivering value, and by delivering value is by being able to have first class, right first time, automated tools that optimize a settlement efficiency, that give their clients a platform to be able to succeed without receiving penalties or overdrafts or being charged for use of credit. So I think when we think about automation, it's about delivering value. I think in whatever role you're in, obviously just focus on a bit of the custodians, ex-custodian, and I think as well, obviously we talked about cash penalties. I think settlement efficiency. We've worked so hard in this region to bring down fail rates, so nobody wants that to go backwards. And I think that's where we have I think this is Kathy's terminology, collective action, so I'm going to borrow it because I think that's really important, because when we think about creating new tools to meet T+1 obligations, we need them to be collectively useful, collectively meeting the same objectives. Otherwise it's just going to muddy the waters. So I think that's kind of what what rings true to me here. I think it's about just delivering value, delivering efficiency, reducing cost in a cost-constrained environment.
Thanks, Emma. I do want to try and answer some of the questions you've had on the Q&A. Thank you to all of you who have submitted them so far. One of the first questions, and I think we can definitely take this one because I think I know the answer to it, is whether or not we have any stats around the number of investment firms looking to move their fund settlement cycle. It says to T+2 in the question, but I don't necessarily have the answer to that one. But Emma, I think I can answer it. So based on our last survey, I think 85% of firms said that they are looking to reduce their fund settlement cycle as a result of the move to T+1. And I know obviously the IEA, etc., have come out with recommendations recently to do that. So it seems like a lot of firms are starting to take that very seriously as they look to close the funding gap and the costs associated with that. And obviously there's still a number of firms who are saying no, but I think the more developed markets we start to see move to a T+1 basis, it's just going to make more and more sense to move your fund dealing cycle to support it. One of the questions that I was maybe going to bring over to Kathy or Gareth, if that's okay, was around challenges in managing cross-border settlements in T+1 for a CSD, specifically across the non-T2S from Europe to APAC and Europe to the US, and some of the recommendations to overcome those challenges from a CSD perspective. I don't know if Gareth, you want to have a stab at that?
I think I think two issues. I see. First of all, one is I think Emma described it well at the beginning. If I look at Euroclear as ICSD, got many clients in Latin America, in North America, in Asia, APAC, so out of region. I think, as Emma described earlier, the timing challenges are harder for clients who are out of region, and so those clients will need to do a lot of work thinking about those kind of timing challenges and how to and how to schedule the work, the operational work, to get to get settlement effectively on T+1, because it is hard. It might be hard if you're in the region, but it's much harder. We're doing some things on the Euroclear side, for example, prioritizing APAC settlement within our settlement algorithm to make sure resources are used effectively and to try to support the regions as they open and as they close. Just one example of what we're doing in APAC. But it's so I think that's one dimension for our clients. I think STP is probably even more important when you're out of region, because you're going to have less time to resolve things, or equally the ability to resolve problems intraday within minutes rather than hours. I think that's maybe the key thing. There will be problems with I think what would be a bad thing is if people had to take on extra shifts after. That's what I think is the worry, if it makes people have too many costs. But if it means that people are putting in place better tooling to resolve problems in minutes rather than hours, that I think is the good outcome.
Yeah, tooling is definitely the key. Kathy, one of the questions we had came in from a custodian. They're basically saying that it's unrealistic for them to be able to get kind of instructions to the CSDs by T due to where they sit in the chain and how quickly their clients are able to get kind of confirmations in from their brokers, etc. What is your kind of view on that?
I would say we feel your pain. I think and I saw the question come up on the screen, and there's a bit more, let's say, info provided there, and the question highlights multiple items. So the fact that there are multiple stages in the chain, there are reliance on information being provided then in the confirmations. Often the information is incorrect. And I think, to me, that just encapsulates, let's say, the problem statement that we have a lot of the time today. But today we have that extra day in the middle where a lot of this poor data quality can be sifted through. We don't have that. My blunt answer would be the recommendations and the roadmap are not just for CSDs and for custodians. They are for everybody in the chain. So I would say those clients, those institutions up the chain should be also sitting with the roadmap, thinking about their processes. These are not optional extras. It's not nice to have. We have to move towards T+1, and there are very concrete recommendations as to what all parties can do to do that. And that's not at all dismissing this. I think it is a genuine challenge for the industry, but this is a fantastic opportunity to tackle them. And again, we come back to this, concerted action by all parties to get T+1 ready. All I would say is we don't have the luxury of time to do this. So if those clients of yours are not yet familiar with the roadmap, I would be scheduling a call with them to make them aware of it and to ask them what their plan is.
Kathy, I like that. We don't have a lot of time, but I do want to ask each of you one very quick question, which each of you, if possible, could answer in one sentence, which is, what separates a firm that survives T+1 versus one that wins under T+1? And Gareth, we'll go for you first.
impact assess every single operational process, because you'll find some odd and unusual impacts that you won't have expected. Eliminate your batch processing and invest strategically. Sorry, that was a long sentence.
Lots of comments, that's okay. Kathy?
I'll say all of Gareth's, and probably add on, given what we just talked about in the last question, be prepared to challenge, not only within your organization, but also have those open and challenging discussions with the folks who are upstream and downstream from you in the chain, and get your technology providers on board if they aren't already.
Thank you. And Emma?
Everything they just said, it's spot on. I think just to add, the need to listen to your providers and to your clients, know what their issues are, and be prepared to change. It's not about the status quo. That's
So
quick
we
for
need
me.
to assess, we need to eliminate batch, we need to be prepared to challenge, we need to listen. I like it. That's actually what we have time for today. Thank you to everyone for joining. Thank you to everyone who submitted a question. I didn't get to answer all of them. For those of you who did leave an email, we will respond to you. I'd really like to thank Kathy, Gareth, and Emma for being wonderful panelists, for being very insightful and open in all of your responses. I'd really like to thank Clearstream and Euroclear for sponsoring this event. And mostly, I'd like to thank you all for joining. Thank you very much. Goodbye.